70 years ago, a small group of British businessmen travelled to China to unlock opportunities between the two countries. They became known as the icebreakers. Meet the bridge builders, the individuals who dare to think beyond the horizon and open up our world.
My name's Tim Clissold, and I was born and grew up in North Yorkshire. And in my mid-20s, I had an opportunity to go to Hong Kong. And I spent a great deal of time in my life in China. And I was originally involved in private equity investment there. And I gradually became more and more interested in sorting out problems there, with quite complex problems. The first time I went to China, I immediately found the geographical setting of Hong Kong to be tremendously dramatic, because it's a very sharp mountain that overlooks a harbour. On the other side there are 9 hills. And I just had this feeling it was something very big and mysterious, the other side of these 9 hills. So for some reason I was kind of drawn to China. And I went up on a ferry from Hong Kong to Guangzhou, about 70 miles. This is in 1987. And it felt as though I'd gone back in time at least 70 years, because China wasn't really very developed at that stage. No internal combustion engines, almost no street lighting, almost no kind of automation. And I travelled right the way through to central China and then down to Chengdu, along the Yangtze, up to Beijing, Datong. And the basic impression that I had in China was that people get up early in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, there'd be people taking vegetables to a market. Very, very active and striving. So that's why I decided that I would focus in on China and learn the language and try and do business in China. Around the late 80s and the early 90s, there was a sea change. The senior analyst, who's a very famous man called Barton Biggs from Morgan Stanley, came out to Hong Kong and he spent 4 or 5 days on the mainland. And when he came back, there was a press conference where he said, I'm tuned in, overfed and maximum bullish. And huge amounts of capital moved very quickly because they were basically reallocating funds towards stocks in the region. So that then stimulated private investors, and they had money and they wanted to put it to work in businesses in China, but they had no capacity to find businesses in China or analyse them. So that's where I got involved. Basically raising a lot of money from US investors, about $420 million US, investing that in factories all over China, and then realising that the contracts that underpinned the investment really weren't, you couldn't implement them. And we eventually sorted out and reached an accommodation with the Chinese partners, which I'm very pleased about and proud of, actually. And I just thought that is worth writing this experience down for first of all, for me to be able to make sense of it, because the act of writing something down forces you to rationalise it all. But I also thought that it would be, useful for other people who wanted to come and invest in China. I spent a tremendous amount of time in China and lived there for a very long time. And in fact, I brought up a family of 4 children there. And that experience has obviously deeply affected me. And I just think there's a lot of things that I learned there that are tremendously useful as reference points for Western society. So I have a great kind of desire to make the Chinese civilization more accessible to foreign people. And the way that I've done that is actually through translating some of China's most famous poets.
安得万里求，盖国周思淫.
And the reason why I chose that is because they really speak to issues that are tremendously important now, and they use a language which we can really bind with on an emotional basis. In terms of the Chinese attitude towards the UK, the things that ordinary Chinese people know about the UK are quite enduring. So literature, basically every Chinese child knows about Shakespeare. Shakespeare is actually compulsory in Chinese education system. But there's absolutely no corresponding level of knowledge in Western society about China. And I think that's a big problem. When I came back, when my children came back from China, they'd been in Chinese schools and they want to continue their Chinese education in the UK, and it basically isn't possible. Over the past few years, I've coordinated the creation of a new A-level syllabus in Chinese civilization, and that was written by 12 of the leading China scholars in the UK, based at a variety of universities. And it needs to be approved by Ofqual, which is the regulator, the educational regulator, and that needs sign-off by the UK government. And that has proved to be very, very difficult. And I just find that tremendously disappointing. But, you know, I'm not going to give up, so I'll just continue to try to push it forward. In terms of the future of the relationship between China and the UK, China is a reality. We don't need to talk about the peaceful rise of China. It's already happened, and it was peaceful. I mean, I would hope that we can get some wisdom from Confucius, which is like 求同存异, which is look for the commonalities and just park the differences, talk about those differences and try and bridge those differences, but just don't make those the most important part of the relationship. Because there are other things where it's so important we cooperate and understand each other.